So I'm going to start off with a quote from Alice Waters that she said, the decisions you make are a choice of values that reflect your life in every way. Values drive our behavior. And I want to start off with both of you and let you answer. What does values mean to you? And then how has that affected your decision and charted your career path or where you are today? Doreen, why don't you start and kind of tell us?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's amazing to be among all of you, and a big applause to Sanjeev and Tom and the team in Asia Society. I mean, this is an amazing gathering. But I think most importantly for me, it's a homecoming, because I actually grew up in the Philippines and I spent my teenage years here. So I do feel that this is the country which in a lot of ways formed me into who I am and gave me the spirit of really taking on things in a very optimistic way, because I think that's what Philippines represents for me. So it's wonderful to be back home. And so I'll start with that. So I think in terms of value for me, I think it's represented, I feel like, with 3 words. First is respect. So value for me is respect. When we can respect others, we can respect the world we live in, and we respect the fact that we can treat everyone equally, which is, again, a lofty statement. But and I think, as Senator Aquino basically said, we live in a very prosperous world now, but with incredible inequality. And in Asia alone, we have more than half the population still living under $2 a day. And last year, I was reading a number. About 85% of the world's growth, if you turn it into wealth, was owned by 1% of the population. So I think, that issue of respect, what do we mean by that? The second one, again, quite related, is inclusion. Do we really think of this as an inclusive world in terms of not only societal inclusion, the environmental inclusion, in terms of really thinking of the person sitting next to you, should they be included in your world? And the last one is courage. I think we need to have the courage to stand up to systems which we feel is not doing so. And that also represents our value of having the courage to also say things and do things to make it better for everyone and make an inclusive world. So those are sort of the 3 words I would say, kind of represents for me.
Thanks, Doreen. John?
Thank you. Just checking. Is my mic on as well? Is it okay? You can still hear me? Okay. As long as you can hear me. Okay, great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Rick. It's a real pleasure to be here as well. And as Rick says, it feels like we're among family with Asia 21. And it's also a pleasure to be back in the Philippines. I've done some work here before with renewable energy startup. Good to see you again, Senator. I'd like to, I guess, my reflection on values, I'd like to share a few initial thoughts as well. In terms of my work, I've tried to, as a consultant, so I wear 2 hats. I'm a consultant and a lawyer. And on the consulting side, I've made a decision to focus on clean tech mainly. And that really is driven by a values perspective about resource scarcity and what the world needs in the critical time that we're in the next 10 to 20 years. I'm sure you all saw the latest IPCC report about how the science is even more alarming than we thought previously. So I start from a sense of really a kind of, maybe in a way, absurdly macro sense of what does the world need, but I think there's a lot of opportunity in identifying needs around what the world requires, and there's still opportunity for us to make a living within that context. So I've made a decision on the consulting side to focus on clean technology, partly on that basis, and that has meant not taking on other types of opportunities around supporting, for instance, emitting resources. But I think the other thing for me about values is that it can be a very self-interested thing in an enlightened way if we say, if I look back in my life, what is the no regrets perspective that I will take on the decisions that I've made? And I think that there are times when we may face choices where we may end up making less money than in the alternative in the short term. But if we satisfy ourselves that this is a perspective that will be no regrets for me in the future. This is, to me, sort of how values comes into play in terms of my work. And as a lawyer, I can talk a little bit later perhaps about how lawyers have to be extremely careful about ethical issues and conflicts and so on, and you have to navigate that. And in this region, now that I'm based in Hong Kong, also wearing a lawyer hat, there's a lot of money flowing around, and there's a lot of temptation. But I think, again, having a sense of what kind of lawyer do I want to be has been rooted in values. In terms of particular values, I would just also say, all three of those words resonated with me. I think that when we think about notions of compassion and kindness and interconnectedness, these are not. We can all come to these from different perspectives. That is to say, one of us might find in it an expression of our Islamic faith, another person Buddhist faith, another person might be an atheist. But there is, I think, a generous space for an overlapping consensus, to use that phrase, around how we can share in certain values. So I think sometimes we hear talk about where values come from. I don't think it matters in the sense that there are enough common values that we can all share and work together around, but we need to do more of.
Great. So those are the opening remarks. So now we are dealing with the incoming class of very high caliber Asia 21 leaders. And the challenge I'm sure they're facing is, how do you balance external versus internal? How do you balance, if you're working for a company that mission doesn't agree with you, can you be really passionate about it? And I think, we've all been through a place where we may have to balance it, maybe made a compromise. Can you share your thoughts on that? If you have to kind of compromise on your value system for maybe a greater good, is it worth it? Is it something that you've gone through, and maybe use an anecdote to tell us about it?
I think for me, I do feel very strongly that I think for each one of us, while we can be, an artist or an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur or a lawyer, whatever we are, we do need to have a beacon, right? So I think this is, this is sort of what will guide us. And it can be through your religion, it can be through your own set of principles, but you do have to have that. So I do feel that given that, you can then say, okay, if I'm trying to reach that and be that, say you believe in participation of women and women getting an equal voice, then you will do whatever it takes and whatever position you're in to make that happen. So I don't believe that you wait for the right situation. You make the situation yourself. So I think I do truly believe that. So I think for me, the whole notion of, the time is not ready now, it doesn't exist, because the time was ready yesterday. So I think we really need to have the courage to say, this is what I stand for and this is what I'll work towards. So I think going back to your point, yes, sometimes the world is not ready for it, right? So I remember when I started IIX, it was with a very lofty goal. And in some ways it was so crazy that I really didn't care if it failed. I was going to change a whole financial system. I was going to create a whole parallel capital markets. I was going to create a social stock exchange. I was going to create these various platforms. I was going to create these bonds with women front and center. But 10 years later, I have done that. But I had to make compromises. And I'll tell you, and now after 10 years, I talk about it. It makes people a little uncomfortable. But when I initially started with all this, it was interesting for me coming back from the US and being back in Asia. I made some very conscious decisions. I made a conscious decision to publicly always wear a sari. Why is that? Because usually sari is seen as a costume, sometimes of weakness. And yet, sari is a very strong statement. You have more than, almost close to 1 billion women wearing saris, doing work in the field, dealing with their families. So I said, this has to be a symbol of power. Now, also interestingly, we were working with markets, we were working with investors who really didn't understand about doing good. Here I was, a woman in a sari. I had to go and convince these people, which was next to impossible. So what I did, even being a feminist and believing in women's voice, I actually turned to my male colleagues of certain ethnicities who were more welcome, and I basically put them in the front. And I said, you guys have to go and do the selling to the investors. And which they did, and it worked. So I think the thing is, interestingly, if I went out there and I said, I'm creating a women's bond, creating livelihood for 400,000 women across Southeast Asia, which we did, and we listed it, it's on SGX, I think it would have taken us even longer. But where I don't compromise, it was very interesting, was at the last minute, say when we did this bond last year, the bankers said to us, our partner, DBS, who was going to sell it in the public market, they said, Durreen, honestly, just drop the women part of this bond and it can sell. Just call it a livelihood bond, it'll sell. The minute you put women, everyone thinks it's touchy-feely, it's handicrafts, it's not going to work. And I said, I am not going to compromise on that. And then they said, well, I'm sorry, but they're not going to buy it. I said, what will it take? And we realized what it would take is for us to have first loss. So again, those of you who understand the mechanics of finance, first loss really means you're creating a product and you're taking entire risk. I put in my entire savings as first loss for the bond. And for me, that was where I did not compromise, because I believed the fact the world needed to see that you can have a financial product with women front and center, and where we are connecting, literally, the women sitting in the remotest part and working with, Negros Occidental, here in the Philippines, to the Wall Streets of the world, and which we did. So I think the thing is, once again, it's what are you willing to sacrifice and what you're willing to do, where keeping your moral compass in front of you.
Now, I'm just doing a follow-up on that. Do you think it changes as you progress through your career? You become stronger in your convictions, you have some success behind you. Does it make it easier versus when you were young and starting off?
I think, again, I will give you a perspective once again as a woman. Okay, so it's very, very different from men versus women. And it is, I'm sorry, it is. And especially coming from a South Asian culture, where as a woman, we're always told what expected of us, which is 99% of the time just to take care of the family and take care of others and think of others. I think the thing is, what happens over time as a woman, you do feel that you get more of a courage. You start thinking of the fact that I can actually be thinking about myself, about what I want to do, rather than thinking of everyone else. Where again, I think a lot of times men can be much more myopic, about what they want to do, and the society encourages that. You will be a lawyer, and we will help you become that lawyer, right? Women don't have that. So I think for us, we really need to go through many more hurdles to actually sort of say, yes, this is what I stand for, and I will actually do it. So I think it's a little different, where you do have an infrastructure supporting you, and in our case, we don't. So it does change as you grow older, and you say, you know what, I will do it.
John, what about you? You want to add anything to that?
Maybe just pension plans in the country is very stable work. And if I just stayed there the rest of my career, I would have had stable work. And I made a decision to move to China, in part because I felt like, okay, I'd learned a lot about the electricity and energy sector and related issues in Canada, but the decisions that China was going to make were going to be so important that I wanted to play, even if I could just play a really small part of helping to shift some of those opportunities around clean technology transfer, around policy decisions. I wanted to play a part of that. So I actually left my role in the middle of the financial crisis and moved to China without a job. And I, people may still question the wisdom of that, but I guess in terms of compromise, it was a financial compromise because I left complete job security. But it was motivated by this kind of idealism and naysayers may say a kind of naive idealism to some extent, perhaps. But I made this decision that I wanted to orient my life towards these issues that I cared about in a region where the decisions being made were so impactful and so important that I would have no regrets looking back on that. So I think there is the financial compromise that can come into play around these decisions. But coming back to this sort of who got principle and being rooted, if you also believe that solving these problems creates opportunity, that you can make a good living working on problems that matter. And so in the short term, there may be some shifts that have to happen and some uncertainty that can result. But over time, you know, there's enough to make a good living also working on these issues.
I agree.
All right. So I'm going to open up to the questions from the audience, but I just want to make a observation and add. I don't know how many of you have heard David Brooks, or you're familiar with David Brooks, but he always talks, he has written a lot of books, but he talks about an external self, an internal self, or the battle between the two selves. You know, the external one that's focused on success, and he calls it the resume values, right? Where you build your resumes, and it's very simple. Input equals to output, higher risks equal to high returns, versus the internal where the more you give, the more you get kind of model, right? And I think having been part of the action lab for the last few days and dealing with people who are actually looking at how do they balance that. Most of these leaders are very well educated. There's a very high opportunity cost. And to kind of say, okay, I'm going to kind of give that or put it on a hold and focus on doing something that's bigger and better than me. Any advice for those people? How do you balance that? Doreen or John, whoever wants to take that.
Do you want to take it first, John?
So balancing the sort of external credentializing aspect with internal fulfillment. I mean, I think
especially for people who are very young, they're starting off, they can go either path. And what advice do you have for these leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it doesn't require as much additional effort as it might seem at first to add that additional question. So let's say somebody wants to work in an investment bank, and they're just working in an investment bank, and sort of typical as a junior person working for an iBank or. I mean, there's nothing wrong, and it's good to get deep financial experience. It's good to get deep technical experience in any area, but I think when we look around with our eyes open, there are always opportunities to impact people around us. And I think to start off with, when Durreen started, I'm just struck by your story that in the beginning it wasn't scaled yet, but you can start somewhere small. And I think that we can feel overwhelmed at times by the problems of the world, but I think it's better to focus instead on how can you help the person in front of you or the person near you. And it may be a very modest intervention at first, but it's going to absolutely make a difference in the life of that person. And I think there are no shortage of opportunities to do volunteering, for example, that can add to that. But it is absolutely the case and I think it's the case for the kind of person that's drawn to age of 21, that you do get more by giving more. I mean, you can sort of delight in the fact that you have changed that life, and it does bring a tear to one's eye to see these kinds of changes that can happen. So I think it's being overly strategic is actually missing that opportunity for fulfillment. And I think that being around people that want to help other people can bring a sort of good energy to your life. But it is going to shift the orientation a little bit from a purely pragmatic, where's the money, where are the jobs, which institutions do I recognize as affording me the most conventional path. And it's going to be unconventional, but I think that should be welcomed.
Yeah, and I think adding to that, I mean, I would look at it two ways. One is, you talked about sort of the right inputs, I guess in our case, the right education, the right schools, et cetera, and the outputs, which is again, do we have the right jobs and the money? But I think perhaps in the equation, what we're not looking at is the outcome. So I think for us, with each of these, what is the outcome of that? Are we actually happy? Are we actually changing anything in this world? And I think, for me, when I think back, I started my career in Morgan Stanley 30 years ago, and it was a very conscious decision in my part because I wanted to learn what's the bastion of power and which financial markets are a bastion of power. And it was very interesting. From there, I went to Grameen Bank, and I remember, my salary from Morgan Stanley to Grameen Bank was I think I was making like $50 a month. No one knew Grameen Bank. This is 28 years ago. And I remember, for me, now, when I think about it, it's very interesting. The fact that, again, I kept that goal in mind. For me, the money was never the issue. It really was the fact, what outcome I was making. And I wanted to bring these two worlds together. So I think, yes, there'll be moments if you have really feel depressed. I mean, I think I'm manic depressive. I always say that. So if you are an entrepreneur, you are a manic depressive. If you're not, there's something wrong with you. So I think the thing is, you'll have manic times and you have times when you feel really down. But I think what will really kind of make you go forward is really, what is the outcome? And also, what's really making you happy? I think that's very important. I think we really don't think about it as much, right? I mean, is it really making you happy? And what you have and what you need, is it at an equilibrium, and is it actually making you happy? And one last thing I'll say, and sorry, this is sort of a little bit my thing, sort of being in Asia, and also we're part of, honestly, sort of the Asian elite here, is we really need to have the courage of not needing validation. Honestly, let's try to make that promise to ourselves that I don't need validation in terms of the right award, the right acknowledgement, the right all of it. And you can say it's easy for her to say, she has been out. Trust me and believe me, I do not seek them out. And trust me and believe me, I really don't care. Because the reality is I'm told enough times that I speak my mind too much. Does it stop me? No. But the thing is, we have to be courageous not to ask for validation. Because I think if you actually have your moral compass, that's the only validation that you need. And I think we need to get away from the fact that, and we are told this, listen, we are told that, oh my God, if only you started in the US and you came to Asia, you've gotten so much more respect. I'm told this all the time, but why? Why do we need that? So I think the thing is, for us, we need to have the courage to say, we believe in what you're doing, what we're doing, and the fact that we don't need anyone else to sort of say that. I don't know. I mean, and I think that's a big part. And now with social media, it's even bigger, right? And we feel sad if we don't get 20 likes on the picture. So I think it's, so I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm insane to think this, but I do feel there is a point to that.
Great. All right. Why don't we kind of open it up to the audience and see if we have any questions from you guys to ask either Doreen or John or me. Come on, we are leaders here. I think there's a microphone.
Hello.
Why don't you introduce yourself, sir?
Good morning. Yeah, my name is Gao Shan. I'm the class 2018. Such a pleasure to be here and listen to the wise words. So my question is to John. There is a saying that, if an Asian goes to the US or goes to Canada, there is a ceiling in their career, It's just because the fact that you're Asian, you're not part of the culture, so, you are not expected to be promoted to the most senior jobs, and that's most likely the situation. As a Canadian coming to Asia, as a leader in particular yourself, have you ever experienced the situation like that? Do you see a ceiling in Asia?
Do I see which?
Do you see a ceiling in your
A glass ceiling.
A ceiling, I see.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, I'm curious to hear this one. We just talked about it last night.
I have to think.
You can be honest. Come
Yeah.
on.
White guy from North.
White guy
America.
versus
Is
the
there a
brown woman
ceiling?
here.
Exactly.
I would. I haven't really felt a ceiling. It's interesting. I've never been asked that question directly, so I had to think about it. I think there are certainly, obviously, there are cultural issues to navigate that are not small, that are quite complex, and I think a lot of expats that, speaking of China in particular, maybe just start with China. So a lot of foreigners, a lot of Westerners that come to China will stay in Hong Kong, Shanghai, Beijing, particularly Shanghai, particularly the French concession, interact with other Westerners. And I think that kind of Westerner coming to China is going to limit themselves because they're self-selectingly staying with other outsiders. They're not really engaging with the culture. I think that if you do engage with the culture, that there are lots of opportunities because China is so massive for collaboration of different kinds. I think the challenges are not so much around, there are there are power structures at play, we all know in China, that an outsider can't be a part of. But I think the challenges are just more around the complexity of the economy and trying to get things done in a place where regulations can, local enforcement of regulations can often be unclear. I mean, those kinds of challenges, I think, are things that I've experienced more helping clean technology companies trying to move into China. But as an individual, now I'm based in Hong Kong, and I think Hong Kong in particular is an interesting case, because I think as a Westerner, I have all kinds of advantages in Hong Kong in particular. And I think this is a bit of a reflection of the sort of colonial background. I have noticed that there's a lot of racism in Hong Kong. I mean, it bothers me. And I was surprised by that. I'd always gone in and out of Hong Kong, but I think I can feel it more living there now. And I think but it's not something that affects me, but it does affect people that I know there. So I would say that just coming back to where it started, I mean, a place like Toronto, I think, at least aspires now so that you can be an Asian background and not have limits. But if people still feel that, that's interesting, because I don't know where the Toronto, Melbourne, New York, if they're not succeeding in this model, where do you look for examples of the success? What else needs to be done? But I would say that, yeah, it's in Hong Kong in particular, there are issues, but they don't affect me. It's my experience. But thank you for getting me to think about it.
Come on, more questions? Good.
Hi, my name is Roshan Paul. I'm from Bangalore in India, and I work on helping people build meaningful careers. So I found the comments about validation really interesting, but that's also kind of an inner journey, and I'm interested in the other side, like the tactical side of that, because I feel increasingly as someone with very globalist, liberal, progressive values that I'm now in the minority, right, globally, and many of us may be the same. Like most of the world disagrees with us or has a competing set of values. And so to get things done, do you have a perspective on how do you negotiate competing values, or how do we tactically work with people who have a very different value set than we do, but also from their perspective very reasonably have their own values? They're just sort of the antithesis of mine. How do we negotiate that tactically when working with people?
Yeah, we talked a little bit how the geopolitical things are shaping us, and we wanted to kind of bring the value system back into that discussion. Dorreen, any thoughts on that?
I will start at a more micro level, right? So I think you're absolutely right. So, when you're trying to you have your value system and you're on this kind of moral high horse that I'm going to change the world. When you're sitting across someone, it's, again, what's the onus? Why should they do it, right? So you really have to sort of come to their level and understand what makes them actually move, right? So case in point, when we first started, I remember our big thing is my big thing was to get Asians and rich Asians to actually invest in Asia in doing good, which was like an impossible task 10 years ago. Now it's quite fashionable, but still, I don't think it's happening much. People talk about it more than they're doing it. So I think what was very interesting is we literally would sit down with the whole analysis of how investing in this, clean energy, biodigester in Cambodia, how this will actually de-risk, this investor's investment in the mining community in Cambodia. We don't like mining, but the reality is this investor sitting on money made his money on mining. So what we had to do is really show them from the financial point of view, if you look at your portfolio and do a risk analysis of your portfolio, how this is going to actually de-risk some of your other investment, because the community is going to make sure that this is actually something that stays on and, and grows, right? And this is also creates a good reputation, for him. So it was very, very interesting, because we would never, ever, ever start with, you should be doing this to save the world. People never like it if you say what they should be doing. I don't like it. I was told my entire life I should be a good girl, and listen to so-and-so and do this and this. Did I? No. So I think the thing is, no one likes to hear what they should be doing. What they like to hear is the fact that what you can do for them that will actually enhance their own position or business or whatnot, and you have to have your own agenda in that, sort of tucked in there. And I think for us, that really worked. And I think these, again, I'm talking on the investor side, these investors now who have been kind of with us now for 7-8 years, now they're actually turning to philanthropy. They're now turning to actually, wow, this is the outcome of this investment. Wow, actually, this is fantastic. So it's almost like we have to find ways to get people in, because I do feel, listen, I'm very defiant, but I think I do feel fundamentally people are good. Okay? You can be from, a different political viewpoint, whatnot, but I think in the core, all of us are actually kind of good. So I think we need to kind of find ways to kind of bring that out. So I think, for me, again, it's a very, very real micro example. And I think even in the geopolitical setting, we need to be able to go across, and kind of do that. Right now, we are in the process of doing a series of women's health bonds in the U.S. for underserved women. We are not saying we're going to only serve underserved Democratic women. Okay, it's like underserved women in the communities where they're not getting, maternal care, reproductive, health. So we are creating these bonds to basically help them. And again, thinking of it as an outcome for these women, in the U.S. So I think, I don't know, and I think somewhere it kind of comes together if you sort of think of it in a more holistic way and find out what ticks them on the other side as well, right? John, what do you think?
John, what do you want to add to the geopolitical? I know you really enjoy that piece.
I do. Well, just to follow on one of Durreen's 3 words initially, inclusion, I think that speaking to people that have different values, there can be appeals to their self-interest around inclusion in 2 ways. One is, and Durreen will know this better than I will, but it is the general principle that by building and creating new markets and new consumers, there's economic opportunity. So inclusiveness means opportunities to make money from new revenue streams, and that may resonate with people more than actually helping at the bottom of the pyramid, depending on what motivates the person. The other is, I think a lot of the populism we're seeing around the world is motivated by this sense that globalization is for elites, it's not helping us. And so I think if you're talking to people that are have a vested interest in some aspect of the status quo, that are resisting some form of progressive change, you can say, look, this trend cannot be ignored, and people have to feel that the economic evolution is going to include them, because the resentment is building, and the building resentment is a risk for you. So it's another de-risking point. And so I do think there is a tactical point around how you speak to different audiences, understanding what motivates them. And it's absolutely right that if you talk about the wrong kind of moral frame for the wrong audience, it's not going to resonate at all.
Great. I think you had a question.
No,
right after.
Hello. I actually wanted to make 3 comments, but before that, I'm a Bhutanese from Bhutan, and I teach happiness.
Capital of happiness, yeah.
I teach happiness in the Indian Institute of Technology in Kharagpur, but I would like to make 3 comments, actually. It's not a question, can I?
That's fine.
Sure.
Okay, great. One is on the compromise. As we're talking to the young leaders, I think compromise is something that you give in and you let other person to also give in. I would believe that 1 + 1 in compromise would make 1.5. It couldn't be 3 or it couldn't be 10. So,
but do you compromise your value system to get there?
That's what I'm saying. We should not compromise our systems. When you have a deep belief in something, you need to walk with it. And in there, you need 2 things to consider. One is considering other, which we talked about in a great length of about it. The other one is courage, what you just mentioned. So when you are able to balance the 2, consideration and courage, you can live through any way that you want to carry yourself forward. That's the first comment. The second one was on the self, inner and outer. I very strongly believe that I is not I. I'm you, you are me. And in the same way, if you consider ourselves really deeply inside, we are not what we think we are. When you have this belief that I'm connected with everything around me, 2/3 of my body is water, that I'm grown so big is all from the food that I've eaten, which is grown by the earth, with its minerals, with water, with the sunlight, with the air. And that's what I constitute of. So when I have this deep belief of non-dualistic states or non-self states, then I'm connected with everyone and everybody. In that very fact, we begin to become not equal, but we start to create an equity, where I would say, for example, if you have, three different height people, one is a tall guy like John, for example, one is a bit shorter like my friend on the right. Now, all of us are going to watch a football game and we don't have a ticket, but there's a fence where Joan can very easily look and watch the football. She, on the other hand, even on her toes, can't make it. I, on my toe, could make it. Now, on equity, if you give equality there, I don't think it works. You need to provide equity, which means we give her a higher stand, I get a smaller one, and he gets nothing because it's there by itself. So I just wanted to make these three comments. Maybe it would help the young leaders to reflect more deeply in and walk their way forward. Thank you very much.
I remember a line which said, right, just being good enough doesn't, like if you're making someone's life better doesn't mean it's fair, right? So we as a leaders need to look at a world that's a little bit more fair. And I agree with your point on that. I think we had a question, right?
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, why values matter. So we talk about not having values and having values, and certain values, of course, everybody has different sets of values, and it's important for each individual and as communities to have values, and those values define and shape our perspectives and behaviors. What we need to be talking about is to what extent values matter nowadays. Because as somebody just pointed out, given the fact there's so many differences of perspectives and values around the world, and given that we talked about we are living in a disruptive world where certain values are being challenged, there are values that drive certain communities that totally go against the interest of the global community. There are certain nation states, there are certain groups who have certain values who advocate, and that's what drives them, and they work towards it, but that endangers the global stability and the prosperity and the world that we would like, and as the force of globalization is being challenged. And like that, you can have a lot of other examples. To what extent values matter? And where would you find bridges? Where would you compromise? As she said, there was a time when she wouldn't compromise to drop the women. Because why? Because you didn't want to grow and expand the company? Or it was so important and fundamental for you to have the women part of the company even if it failed? The failure was good because you retained your value? Is that an example that we can take forward? That no matter if we fail, just continue to hold on to a certain value. Doesn't matter if it fails us or it fails the whole community as a whole. I think it's something that we need to think about. And of course, this is a very interesting setting for people coming from different backgrounds and having different value sets to think about it, that each of us have certain values that shape us, but are we willing to compromise in a certain extent of those core values that we all believe, as long as it advances the interest of the whole? Thank you.
So I think, can I just comment on that? I think that's a very interesting comment, but I think also it's absolutely okay to fail when you're actually holding on to your value system, And yes, and you see this every day. People are thrown in jails now, right? I mean, people are being shot, being killed because of their value system. But I think the thing is, that's again, they're heroes. The fact that they're really making that sacrifice. If it actually works, and again, we need all of us to be doing our part in pushing forward, it actually does work towards a better world. And one thing I didn't tell you, so this whole women's livelihood bond, and I stuck to it and gave all my savings away. I don't know what's going to happen to my kids' education, whatever. I didn't care. For me, why? It really was the fact that we have a capital market system, okay, for 800 years. 800 years. The first stock exchanges were in Belgium and in Netherlands. They were trading human beings and commodities, right, that they were getting from Asia. So the reality is, in 800 years, we never had a single security which focused on doing good. That's appalling. That is appalling. So for me, I didn't go up there and say that, but for me, I said, you know what? I will uphold my value and give what it takes to actually have a listing called Women's Livelihood Bond, and it's creating livelihood for 400,000 women across Philippines, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And if you go to Bloomberg, you'll see the ticker, WLB, and it says what the bond is, what coupon it's giving, and how many lives it has saved so far, it created livelihood for. And for me, when that went up, I don't cry very easily. And I think that's the other thing. I think when you're an entrepreneur, you have a very thick skin. I actually cried that day. So I think now, I feel a year, 2 year, 3 year from now, it'll be passé. It'll be like, yeah, so what? What does that even, what's the big deal, right? I want that to be that. I want it to be no big deal. So I think, if we are working towards that, and some of us will have to kind of take the bullets, I do feel that you have to be defiant and be optimistic at the same time, that we can create a better world. At least that's what gets me up in the morning.
It says, right, nothing worthwhile doing can be done in a lifetime. And I think you're setting things in motion. And I think that's a big driving factor. You may fail, but you're setting up the next company that's going to come around doing the right thing. And I think you look at the bigger picture. But it's tough in this current geopolitical situation that we live in. It's frustrating at times, but I think inclusion is the way. It means we've talked about it, that it will also pass. So, yeah.
Just two very quick thoughts on why we need to speak up. I mean, one is returning to the point about our relative starting points, and exemplified by the example of height. But, people talk a lot about meritocracy, and I think we all have to be very honest with ourselves that the notion of meritocracy, there has to be a big caveat attached to that. I mean, so if somebody believes they succeeded entirely by their own resources, their resources include their intellect, their emotional intelligence, and these are things that people didn't choose before they're born. I mean, there's social aspects that have helped shape them. So even in the case where somebody believes that it's all been on their bootstraps, there's still been sort of an element of luck or lottery in being that brilliant to begin with, right? Which we don't choose. So that's the first reason why you look at somebody else that isn't as well off, and there's a need to help, but also to return to Armin's point about to what extent values matter. We were talking yesterday about the notion of that sort of inaction or silence can be a form of assent. And it was actually a rabbi in Pittsburgh after the terrible tragedy in the synagogue in Pittsburgh that said, in the Jewish tradition, we have this notion that silence is assent. So I think we all have to think about situations where not saying anything at all is actually providing a tacit space for something unacceptable to happen. Edmund Burke has that line, all that is required for evil is for good men, let's say good people, to do nothing, right? So to what extent values matter? I mean, there are all kinds of examples in the world where it doesn't matter, and we're allowing something bad to happen as a result. But there was somebody's...
Right, bad people get elected by good people who don't vote, right? So there's always a line. So yeah, silence is not tolerable. Any other question from the audience? Use the mic.
Hi, I'm Govinda from 2016 batch, and nice to come back here. Thanks to Sanjeev and Tom. Thank you for the nice view, and I think we are, at least from my side, like I'm just started thinking about all these things, what you guys have already done it and have moved forward. What my conflicting idea is here, that I come from Switzerland. Okay, I'm Indian living in Switzerland, and that's where, and I work in energy access area in developing countries. For me, the issue is that conflict between West and East. When we talk to Westerners, at least I'm talking about Europeans, not Americans. I don't have experience with them, or in America, that people say in Europe, hey, that's good, take my money, take the network, it's good, do it. And what I feel is it's very transactional. I have the connection with my people there in West, and they don't get it, like why I'm doing that. Is it normal? Should we keep it like, okay, fine, like I'm looking for money, okay, I get my money, I have all my financial shit, or I'm looking for some connection, you give me connection. But how do you walk them through your journey? And is it just me feeling here because I'm really new in this sector? Or is it just normal and just move on and people will just follow you? Thank you.
Durreen, you probably can answer that.
I think, with us, we always, we do stay true to ourselves, and I have been from the get-go in really sort of making it clear the impact that we are creating and we intend to create. So I think, yes, and there's a financial transaction, as a part of it, but we measure the impact, we actually kind of talk about it, and we reflect it. So I think, it's again how you're packaging it. They may not even focus on it, but I think you need to be true to yourself on why you're doing it. And you need to share that. And maybe, over time it'll start sinking in. But I think you need to, you really do need to stay true to yourself. Because again, that's why, like now, I can almost sense that little bit of like, oh God, you want to be free and you want to be passionate and do that. And whether they understand you or not, at some point they will see that. They will see that, that at your core, this is what you're doing it for. So that would be my thing.
Just one comment. Before you had mentioned that you should not look for validation, what you believe in, just move on there. But isn't it like, it's great, like what we believe, we want to move on, but once you get validation, people start following you, and that's important because you as alone cannot move it. So at the end, you need kind of some validation, winning some awards, get some here and there, and that's where the crowd will start believing. Didn't you feel that way? Or
again, I don't. And again, maybe just because I'm at a stage in my life, I honestly maybe don't care about these things. But I'll tell you, it was very interesting. There's a video. So if you just Google it, you'll find it. There's a TED Talk, just 3 minutes, and it's about the follower. Okay, and it's very interesting. I think if you Google like dancing follower or something, it'll come up. It's 3 minutes. Okay. And what it shows, it's very interesting. This man goes up and he's doing this crazy dance, and it's on this kind of slope, and everyone was sunbathing, and they kind of look at him. They're like, "Oh Lord," like look on their face. There's another crazy guy, right? You've probably seen it. And then there's one guy kind of looks at him and then starts mimicking him, and then another person starts mimicking him, and basically the message of the video is then the leader doesn't even matter. Okay, so it's almost the first follower, the first believer who you have, who basically takes it to the next level. And if you think about it, a lot of, if you think of even religious context, the religious stories, it really is that, right? So I think it's more sort of you have to have a group of dedicated people, and again, you don't go and recruit them. I think they come and find you, who believe in what you do. And I think that sort of kind of spreads in itself. So I don't know, maybe I'm just, again, too organic, too, I don't know. So I think it's, I truly believe that, so I think, because if it kind of somehow works, so I think you just have to get that first follower, and they will spread the word.
Yeah, I think it's also self-validation, internal validation. I don't think you need to be worried about that. Yeah, because I think you do the right thing, and I think things will follow. I mean, that's the experience I've seen. Doreen has been expressing that you stay true to your path, things will follow. Good things happen to good people. I believe that, and I think
most of the time.
Most of the time. So, all right, I think we'll have one last question. Two. All right, quick question.
A rock star. I like that. Yes. Oh my God.
I want to.
So
and I want to say
this. I put the sparkly nail polish. Yes.
No,
all right.
it's just who you are as a person, because I do attend a lot. I mean, I am in a lot of places where we have women doing incredible stuff, but then they don't own their feminism the way you do. And I'm so glad that you are where you are in the sector that you are, being the feminist that you are, and completely unapologetic about it. This is why I think you're a rock star, and I'm so happy to be here celebrating you and congratulating you for everything.
We're celebrating
that you
all of
are.
us here.
And all of us,
Thank
of
you.
course. But
Yes.
I really wanted to say this to you. I think it's an amazing conversation, but you are more amazing than the conversation. Yeah.
Thank
We all
you. Very
agree with
kind.
that.
You're very, very kind. You're very, very kind. Thank you.
All right, Jerry. Last question.
Okay, I'm Cherry from China. Just quick question. I'm really curious to learn your China perspective. because I happen to be working in the field of values. I help organizations find their values. So what do you see is the areas of improvement for China in terms of value? And what do you see is the area for contribution for China to the region?
Hi, John.
John.
We're getting excited, but keep it short. I think we are almost out of time.
Sure. So just, I think coming back to how Asian society was formed with this view of trying to promote peace between the U.S. and Asia and now the Western Asia. I mean, this is why this organization is so important. I think this part of the world is where the future is happening. There needs to be better integration. People need to know each other better. There are all kinds of historical animosities that are still there beneath the surface, all of which has to be confronted. And China, there's a sense in China, which we also spoke about yesterday. At times, in some quarters in China, there's a bit of, there's a German word, Schadenfreude, which is a little bit delight in some misfortune of others. The U.S. is having a tough time, and not everybody in China is unhappy about all of those challenges the U.S. is facing, because it means that, in relative terms, China's opportunities enlarge. But the question for China, and I would ask this to you, and I would ask this to everybody that is excited that China is going to play a bigger role. What's China's vision for the future? If China is going to become the world's leading economy and maybe leading influencer generally, where is it taking us? What's the vision for governance, not just for China, but globally? We used to worry about what was happening inside China, and of course, foreigners have only a limited say or capacity to influence, but China is investing $1.9 trillion in projects around the world where it's influencing Latin America and Africa. It's shaping governance in these places. So the old argument that we have nation states and we don't interfere with each other doesn't reflect the world we're in anymore. And so I would say to China, what's your vision for global governance within which you're going to play a larger role? And that's where I think I don't hear that articulation coming clearly yet. And I think that's the real opportunity and the need that the world has to hear from China.
Thanks, John. Well, I think we're almost out of time. All I'm going to tell you is that this is a starting point. These are thoughts that we want to put in your heads, and you think through this. We have two great people up here. Obviously, one's a rock star. You might want to spend some more time with her while you have it. And I really hope we see more of Durreen at these summits, because I know you've been coming after a long time. But we really appreciate your time, John, Durreen. And you guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this session, the opening session. A lot more to come. So I hope you guys all have a wonderful summit. Thank you.
Thank you.